Chapter 1 Mystery Girl. It all began on a beautiful spring morning in a village called Whistler in Canada, a pretty little village in the mountains of British Columbia. There was a cafe in the village with tables outside, and at one of these tables sat a young man. He finished his breakfast, drank his coffee, looked up into the blue sky, and felt the warm sun on his face. Nick Lortz was a happy man. The waiter came up to his table. "More coffee?" he asked. "Yeah, great," said Nick. He gave the waiter his coffee cup. The waiter looked at the camera on the table. "On vacation," he said. "Where are you from?" "San Francisco," Nick said. He laughed. "But I'm not on vacation. I'm working. I'm a travel writer, and I'm doing a book on mountains in North America. I've got some great pictures of your mountain." The two men looked up but Whistler Mountain behind the village. It looked very beautiful in the morning sun. "Do you travel a lot then?" asked the waiter. "All the time," Nick said. "I write books and I write for travel magazines. I write about everything. Different countries, towns, villages, rivers, mountains, people." The waiter looked over Nick's head. "There's a girl across the street," he said. "Do you know her?" Nick turned his head and looked. "No, I don't." "Well, she knows you, I think," the waiter said. "She's watching you very carefully." He gave Nick a smile. "Have a nice day." He went away back into the cafe. Nick looked at the girl across the street. She was about 25, and she was very pretty. "She is watching me," Nick thought. Then the girl turned and looked in one of the shop windows. After a second or two, she looked back at Nick again. Nick watched her. "She looks worried," he thought. "What's she doing? Is she waiting for somebody?" Suddenly, the girl smiled. Then she walked across the street, came up to Nick's table, and sat down. She put her bag down on the table. The bag was half open. "Hi, I'm Jan," she said. "Do you remember me? We met at a party in Toronto." "Hi, Jan," said Nick. He smiled. "I'm Nick, but we didn't meet at a party in Toronto. I don't go to parties very often and never in Toronto." "Oh," the girl said, but she didn't get up or move away. "Have some coffee," said Nick. The story about the party in Toronto wasn't true, but it was a beautiful morning, and she was a pretty girl. Maybe it was a party in Montreal or New York. The girl laughed. "Okay, maybe it was, and yes, I'd love some coffee." When she had her coffee, Nick asked, "What are you doing in Whistler? Or do you live here?" "Oh, no," she said. I'm just traveling through." "I'm a travel writer," Nick said, "and I'm writing a book about famous mountains." "That's interesting," she said, but her face was worried, not interested. When she looked across the road again, a man with very short white hair walked across the road. He was about 60 years old, and he was tall and thin. The girl watched him. "Are you waiting for someone?" asked Nick. "No," she said quickly. Then she asked, "Where are you going next, Nick?" "To Vancouver for 3 or 4 days," he said. "When are you going?" she asked. "Later this morning," he said. There was a letter in the top of the girl's half-open bag. Nick could see some of the writing, and he read it because he saw the word Vancouver. "And we can meet at the Empress Hotel, Victoria, Vancouver Island on Friday afternoon. So she's going to Vancouver too, he thought. Suddenly, the girl said, "Do you like movies?" "Movies?" "Yes, I love movies," he said. "Why?" "I know a man, and he loves movies and going to the cinema," she said slowly. "People call him Mr. Hollywood." She smiled at Nick. "Can I call you Mr. Hollywood too?" Nick laughed. "Okay," he said. "And what can I call you?" She smiled again. "Call me Mystery Girl," she said. "That's a good name for you," said Nick. Just then, the man with white hair came into the cafe. He did not look at Nick or the girl, but he sat at a table near them. He asked the waiter for some breakfast. Then he began to read a magazine. The girl looked at the man, then quickly looked away again. "Do you know him?" Nick asked her. "No," she said. She finished her coffee quickly and got up. "I must go now," she said. Nick stood up too. "Nice too," he began, but the girl suddenly took his face between her hands and kissed him on the mouth. "Drive carefully, Mr. Hollywood." "Goodbye," she said, with a big, beautiful smile. Then she turned and walked quickly away. Nick sat down again and watched her. She walked down the road and into a big hotel. Now what? Thought Nick. Was that all about? The man with white hair watched Nick and waited. After 4 or 5 minutes, Nick finished his coffee, took his books and his camera, and left the cafe. His car was just outside the girls' hotel, and he walked slowly along the street to it. The man with white hair waited a second, then quickly followed Nick. From a window high up in the hotel, the girl looked down into the road. She saw Nick and the man with white hair about 50 yards behind him. Nick got into his car, and the man with white hair walked quickly to a red car across the street. 5 seconds later, Nick drove away in his blue car, and the red car began to follow him. When the girl saw this, she smiled, then went to put some things in her travel bag. Later, too, a hand in the back. That evening, in his hotel room in Vancouver, Nick could not stop thinking about the girl in the Whistler Cafe. Why did she come and sit with him? She didn't know him, and that story about a party in Toronto wasn't true. And she was worried about something. But what? And that kiss. It was nice, of course. But why did she do it? Maybe she liked my face, Nick thought, or my brown eyes. But I'm not going to see her again, so it doesn't matter. Forget it. He put some money in his pocket and went downstairs to the hotel restaurant. But there were no free tables, so he walked down to Gastown and found a restaurant there. After dinner, he went for a walk. Vancouver was a friendly city, and Nick liked walking through Gastown and Chinatown, looking in the shops and watching the people. It was nearly dark now, and it was a busy time of the evening. There were a lot of cars and a lot of people. After a time, Nick began to walk back to his hotel. He came to a busy street and waited with a small crowd of people to go across. A tall woman in a blue dress stood next to him. She turned and smiled at him. "It's the first warm evening of spring," she said. "It's nice to be out after the long, cold winter." "Yeah," said Nick. "It's great." Suddenly there was a hand in his back, and the hand pushed Nick into the road. Nick fell on his face in front of a big green car. People screamed, But the green car stopped only inches from Nick's head. The woman in the blue dress ran into the road and pulled Nick to his feet. "Are you okay? What happened?" she said. The driver of the green car shouted angrily at Nick, but Nick did not hear him. "Somebody pushed me," he said to the woman. "I didn't fall. Somebody pushed me. I didn't see anybody." Nick looked at the faces of the people near him, but he didn't know them. Then he saw a man's back. The man was tall and thin and had very short, white hair. He walked quickly away down the street and did not look back. "Hey, you!" Nick shouted. "Wait!" But the man did not stop, and he was soon lost in the crowds. "Did he push you?" asked the woman in the blue dress. "I don't know," Nick said. "Do you know him?" she asked. "I don't know his name," Nick said, "but I know that short, white hair. Now, where did I see it before?" The woman began to move away. "I must get home," she said. "Are you okay now?" "Yeah, I'm okay," Nick said. "And thanks. Thanks for your help." "That's okay." The woman smiled. "Be careful now." Back in his hotel, Nick sat on his bed and thought. It was an accident. Nobody pushed me. It was an accident. Nobody wants to kill me. And there are hundreds of men in Vancouver with white hair. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, but Nick couldn't sleep. He listened to the cars in the road, and he looked at the night sky through his hotel room window. Then he sat at the table and tried to write some more of his book about mountains. But he couldn't think about his work. He got back into bed. There were 4 or 5 magazines in the hotel room. They were not very interesting, but Nick sat in bed and opened one, and saw a photo of Mystery Girl. He looked at the picture very carefully. But yes, it was her. Jan, the girl from the Whistler Cafe. She was next to a man of about 50 or 55, and they were in the garden of a big, expensive house. They smiled to camera, and they looked very happy. Canadian millionaire Howard Hudson and his daughter Meg, it said, under the picture, at their home in Toronto. Meg Hudson, not Jan, not Mystery Girl. Meg Hudson, the daughter of a millionaire. Nick read it again. Why did she come and sit with me in the cafe at Whistler? He thought. Millionaires' daughters don't sit with strangers in cafes and then give them a big kiss when they leave. Why did she do it? What did she want? He thought back to the cafe in Whistler and the girl next to him at the table. Then he remembered something. He remembered a man at a table near them in the cafe. A tall, thin man, about 60 years old. A man with very short, white hair. Nick didn't sleep much that night. Chapter 3A Walk in the Park. The next day was Thursday. Nick stayed in his hotel room and wrote about mountains all morning. Then he drove to Stanley Park in the afternoon. He sat and read a book for an hour. Then he went for a walk under the tall trees. There was nobody here. It was quiet, and he could walk and think. He thought about Meg Hudson and about the man with white hair. Did he know Meg Hudson? Did she know him? He remembered Meg Hudson's last words. "Drive carefully, Mr. Hollywood." Why did she say that? Why did she call him Mr. Hollywood? He didn't understand any of it. Suddenly, he heard a noise. He stopped. That was a gun, he thought. There's somebody in the trees with a gun. There it is again. Then something hit the tree over his head. Somebody shooting at me, Nick thought. He turned and ran, and somebody began to run after him. Nick ran through the trees. There was no sun in here, and it was half dark, and there were no people, nobody to help him. I must get to my car, Nick thought. Find some people, the police. He ran on. He could still hear the gunman behind him, so he ran faster. After 3 or 4 minutes, he stopped and listened. He was all quiet. Nick was afraid. What's happening? He thought. Why is somebody shooting at me? First a hand pushes me in front of a car, and now somebody's shooting at me. He waited another second or two, then walked quickly back to his car. He was very careful. He looked and listened all the time, but nobody came out of the trees, and nobody shot at him. Then he saw people, women with young children, some boys with a football, 2 men with a dog. He began to feel better. Nobody can shoot me now, he thought. Not with all these people here. 10 minutes later, he was back at his car. There was a letter on the window. Nick read it. It said, "I'm going to kill you, Mr. Hollywood." Nick drove to the nearest police station. He waited for half an hour. Then a tired young policeman took him into a small room. Nick told his story, and the policeman wrote it all down. "So, what are you going to do?" asked Nick. "Nothing," said the policeman. "Nothing," said Nick. "But somebody shot at me and, Mr. Lords," the policeman said, tiredly. "How many people are there in this town with guns?" "I don't know," said Nick. "But you didn't see the gunman. Was it a man? A boy? A woman? Color of eyes? Long hair? Short hair? You don't know, because you didn't see anybody. Maybe it was an old girlfriend. Maybe somebody doesn't like your travel books, Mr. Lords. But what about the man with white hair in Whistler?" said Nick. "The girl, Meg Hudson, called me Mr. Hollywood in the cafe, and this man heard her. And now I get a letter to Mr. Hollywood on my car. Who is this Mr. Hollywood? We all want answers to our questions, Mr. Lords," the policeman said. "But we don't always get them. Questions, but no answers." Nick walked out of the police station and drove to his hotel. He was angry and afraid. How did the man with white hair find me in Vancouver? He thought. Did he follow me from Whistler? Is he following me now? Maybe he's staying at my hotel, too. In the next room, with his gun. Chapter 4: The Man with White Hair. Nick stopped his car in front of the hotel. He looked carefully before he got out, but there was nobody with white hair near the hotel. He half ran through the hotel doors and went to the desk inside. "I'm looking for a man with very short white hair," he said to the woman behind the desk. "He's staying here, I think. He's about 60 years old and he's tall and thin." The woman did not look very interested. "There are a lot of visitors in the hotel," she said. "Do you know his name?" "No, I don't," Nick said. "He's a friend of a friend, you see. He arrived in Vancouver yesterday, and I must find him. It's very important. Please help me." The woman looked at him. "There are 350 rooms in this hotel," she said, "and maybe 30 or 40 men with white hair. How can I remember all their names?" She turned away to answer a telephone call. Nick walked away from the desk. A drink, he thought. I need a drink. He went into the hotel bar, got a drink, and sat down at a table. So, what do I do now? He thought. And then he remembered something. A letter in the girl's half-open bag in the Whistler Cafe. And we can meet at the Empress Hotel, Victoria, Vancouver Island, on Friday afternoon. And tomorrow was Friday.